Artificial intelligence has become so advanced, it has now surpassed human performance.
About the threats AI poses to the social order.
All global jobs could be affected by artificial intelligence.
To bring in a law that would govern the use of artificial intelligence.
What does it mean to make something totally new, fundamentally different to any invention that we have known before? It is clear that we are at an inflection point in the history of humanity.
Again, we are at the mercy of giant private companies who are now going to be in charge of the most groundbreaking technology in history.
We have to limit access to the tools and the know-how to carry out that kind of experimentation.
Do you know how many regulations there are specifically addressing tech companies? 0.
What was cutting edge a few years ago is now open source.
The album is suddenly not going to be like Terminator and decide to kill us. That is not what's happening. Someone is going to decide to kill us. That's different.
I don't think we are prepared, and I think it's important for us to be super aware that this is going to be a dramatic transformation.
Please welcome to the stage writer, author, and podcast host Kara Swisher and CEO of Microsoft AI, Mustafa Suleyman.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? This is not Megan Rapinoe. They like Megan Rapinoe here, just so you know.
Damn straight.
Yeah, so we're going to be taping this just for you guys to know. So be very enthusiastic because we're going to do a live. There's wind up here and things like that. So, but make yourself known when you like things or you don't like things, whatever you want. We'll have a time for questions at the very end. But we're going to try to cover a wide range of things. I've been doing a ton of AI interviews over the years, and the first one was Elon. Let's not get into that. But it was 10 or more years ago. He was the first person who started talking about it with me, along with Sam Altman. But Mustafa was one of the very earliest, and we were just recounting backstage. I broke the story when his company was bought by Google, and he doesn't remember this, but when I called to tell him I was publishing it, he goes, "Fuck," or something like that. He was very mad, too bad. It was a great scoop. But it was a big deal at the time, and I think very few people understood what was happening right then. And this was a decade ago, right? So, all right, so we're going to get started. And I just want to have just one moment. Someone I interviewed on this stage a couple of years ago, Susan Wojcicki, who is CEO of YouTube, died this year. She had a really huge impact on women in tech, on Google, on a lot of stuff. And I just want to say, wherever she has gone, I'm not a religious person, but she's what a woman, I have to say. She's one of the few people I really admired in tech. So, I mean, I admire more people, but she's one of them on the top. Anyway, she was great here. She was a lot of fun. We showed off some things, and I miss her very much. Anyway, all right, let's begin. I'm going to start with the live intro, so you'll hear that. This will sound a little like a podcast. Then we'll go from there, and then we'll get to questions at the end. Thanks for joining us here at Lesbians Who Tech, and also, just so everyone knows, we're recording a live episode of my podcast On with Kara Swisher today, too. Thanks all the lesbians at Lesbians Who Tech and the men who love them. So Mustafa, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Good. So let me, first, congratulations on your new job. I think it's relatively new.
Yep.
This past March, you joined Microsoft as CEO of Microsoft AI. The last time we spoke was June of 2023, which seems a million years ago. And your startup, InflectionAI, had launched a personal chatbot, Pi. That was just before you got a $1.3 billion influx, some of which came from Microsoft. Reid Hoffman reportedly called your hire a peanut butter plus chocolate moment. First of all, do you feel like a peanut butter cup? But in all seriousness, when we talked, you wanted to get in on the bottom, be a startup at the time. Talk a little bit about the shift to big tech, because Inflection was so there was a series of hot AI startups, and you'd been around for many years at DeepMind and everywhere else. So talk a little bit about that.
At the time I was at Google, this is sort of around 2022, and Google was sort of struggling to really get started in the LLM revolution, even though it had been one of the main inventors of the core technology,
And
transformers.
early to investing.
Yeah, super early, and internally, you know, I worked on Lambda, which was the precursor to Bard, which then became what we have now as Gemini, and we were really trying to get this deployed into search, and the company was sort of proceeding quite carefully and cautiously, and maybe a little too cautiously for a bunch of us, and we just felt that it was the right time to try and get these things into production and get feedback and experiment with them. That's what
Why
we
the
did.
caution? It's safety?
You know, I think
bureaucratic situation?
I admire the caution because you don't know what you don't know. And I think these models are really powerful. They're fundamentally different to the kind of software that we've built in the past. And so you just don't know what's going to happen when they make contact with reality.
Right.
And, you know, it's a bold step to go first. And ultimately, in the end, it was OpenAI that forged ahead, and then obviously the rest is history. Everyone else has caught up.
So when you're over at Google, which is one of the biggest tech companies in the history of the planet, and they're moving slowly, and you see something like OpenAI in an area you had been in for a decade, what is the process of thinking of leaving a company? Because a lot of people here are developers, or they're deciding whether to do a startup or join a big company. How difficult, I mean, obviously you sold the company to Google a long time because you needed more power, presumably, right?
Compute power.
Compute power, yeah, right.
Just
right.
to clarify.
Yeah, compute power. Later, worldwide domination.
Right, right.
It's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. When you were thinking of going, what is that calculus? Because you started as a startup, gets bought, you're in this powerful place, and then you want to go.
I mean, look, I think what's changed is that the cycles of iteration and innovation are just getting tighter and tighter. So there was this window where it felt like if we could launch first at Inflection, then Pi could end up becoming the #1 conversational AI. And it turns out that we launched 3 months after ChatGPT in sort of January. ChatGPT had obviously exploded, the fastest growing, you know, piece of software or experience of all time, of any kind. And so, you know, in this market, in this industry, being third or fourth is a very, very difficult position to play from. And so what I realized over the course of the sort of 2 years that we did Inflection is that, you know, we really have to be first with these things.
Right,
and that makes a big difference.
Reminds you, there was a bunch of search engines along with, there was Excite, there was a bunch that just, InfoSeek, which was bought by Disney. And, you know, it was interesting when, eventually it was bought by, no, Disney, yeah, I think it was Disney. When one of the companies, I think it was Yahoo, bought one of them, they didn't buy the big one. They tried to buy Google, and then they didn't. And I think that being second or third in this market is impossible. Is that your feeling?
No, I wouldn't say it's impossible. I mean, there are benefits to going after, right? You can observe the mistakes of those who go before, and you can actually figure out how the market dynamics lay out. I mean, if you look at this in the case of messaging, you know, WeChat went second by a long way on mobile, but really rethought the messaging platform from the ground up with all the integrations that you would hope for. And even today, I would say that like the Western messaging apps are still a couple steps behind in terms of full integration of all the services.
So right now, it feels like to many like a real arms war going on with all these companies, and that to get there first, to be out front. But it doesn't necessarily mean they will be the most dominant. Again, as I said, there were a billion search engines. There was several social networks. I mean, we all remember MySpace, and then it wasn't, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another important dynamic, which is that these models are being open sourced, right? So
talk a little about, you mentioned in the video before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing dynamic because, you know, the very best companies with the most resources in the world are spending billions of dollars to train these incredible models. And, you know, within 6 months or even less now, everybody in the world has access to a model of the same performance. And so increasingly, the pre-trained models are going to be commoditized. I mean, I think we're almost there. And so the real craft is going to be in adapting the models, how you fine-tune them, you know, and really kind of make them applicable to the specific use case that you really care about as a developer or a product maker.
Right, you meant, Satya Nadella mentioned that today. It's not, everyone's gonna be, he kept using the word commodity. He used a word I love called agentic. which is not a word. I'm sorry. Frank Shaw here told me it was, but it's not. It's being an agent, right? That these are agents for people.
Yeah, I think what that kind of means is that so far, this is technology that has been made by researchers who are obsessed with the technology for its own sake, and they're kind of individual pieces. It's like a vision recognition algorithm, it's a speech generation algorithm, it's a text generation algorithm. And now we're going to sort of combine all those pieces into coherent agents. No, I mean, they're going to be like full scale. It'll be able to see what you see, hear what you hear, talk about what you can observe. It'll remember what you've said and be able to act on that over time, call APIs, interact with other agents. And so I think like the world we're moving towards is one where there are these coherent full-scale agents that can really do amazing things in the world.
Which is services, right? I mean, you're really just talking about, because one of the things of the early internet, it was very hard to use until the browser happened, right? And even then, it was sort of, you did it yourself. It was sort of, you kind of, you artisaned quite a bit of it in the beginning, and then AOL came and put it together, for example. When you think about, let me finish that. When you think about where it's happening, does it still necessitate the dominance by big companies like a Microsoft, et cetera? Is that what caused you to say, jig is up, we need, seek higher ground, essentially?
No, I mean, it's unclear how it's going to play out. Like, big companies that can afford to stay at the absolute cutting edge clearly are going to have an advantage, can hire the best people, they have access to amazing data.
Because of cost,
It's a cost advantage for sure. But at the same time, this impulse to open source is an inherent part of the community, and I think that's going to continue for many years. And so in terms of actually being able to shape an AI to your own values as a consumer, or build an AI into your service or experience as a developer, that ability is going to be available to everybody. And actually, in previous waves, there's been a technical barrier to entry. You've had to learn a language, a compute language, or you've had to understand and use a piece of software. Whereas now you can kind of program these models in natural language. And that is a very kind of democratizing aspect of this new wave, which is different to previous waves.
Because the idea is that only the large companies can survive here, that because of the computing, the energy needs, we'll get into that in a minute, but that it's not a game for smaller players. You just told me backstage the opposite.
Yeah. I said the opposite?
That you thought smaller players...
Oops.
No, that smaller players would do okay here. Because the early internet was inexpensive.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying smaller players will also survive. There's these countervailing forces. Both the big companies will do really well, and the smaller companies, because of open source, are on a level playing field. So that's why it's like the most competitive market we have seen in decades, because everybody has a slightly different advantage. In fact, it's actually an advantage to not build your own pre-trained model, because then you can use any one of 2 or 3 or 4 different models and focus all your expertise as a small company developer on adapting the model to your specific use case.
So I'm trying to think of the metaphor. It'd be like, you don't all have to search for gasoline, for oil, right?
Yeah.
Just some of you do, and then you all get the benefits, and then businesses were built off of that oil, for example. So, but you had this company, and you were sounding like you liked being independent, and then suddenly you're an employee of Microsoft.
Well, the mistake that we made at Inflection is that we built our own pre-trained models, right? So when I first launched, part of the reason why we raised so much money is because we built a model that was as good as the absolute cutting edge from DeepMind, OpenAI, and from Microsoft. And within 8 months of us building that model, multiple groups had completely open sourced it. So it kind of undermined our core business proposition. I didn't expect that these things were going to be open sourced at this scale. I thought that, there was, these are so valuable, why would they get open source? And it turns out there was an entire ecosystem around open source.
So what did you say to yourself? Uh-oh?
I was like, eek.
Eek.
I might have used the word that I used back in 2014.
Yeah. Oh, no.
that I don't remember.
So what did you do then, and why Microsoft?
Well, Microsoft was actually our main investor from the outset anyway. I have an amazing long-standing relationship with Satya and the team there, and they sort of basically said to us, look, we have the resources, we have a big gap in the company, we need a team like yours to come and really lead consumer, because I think whilst the company in the last decade has been incredibly successful at cloud and enterprise sales and so on, where the company hasn't really made traction is on mobile, for example, or in sort of really younger consumer more generally, and that's what we're really targeting at the moment.
Targeting at Microsoft. But they also had their big investment in OpenAI, which many people lauded as a really smart move on his part. How do you look at that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that investment in OpenAI is going to go down as one of the great moves in
the
in
Facebook
corporate
investment
history.
turned out rather well too. But
Yeah, that's not too bad. It's not too bad.
Yeah. I made fun of it at the time. I looked like an idiot, but go ahead.
Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing.
I thought this
isn't
one
it?
was smart, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was also brave.
Yeah.
I mean, $1 billion in 2019 on a technology that was very, very far from doing anything in practice. It was pure research. So it was really just a kind of trade as like, they couldn't get DeepMind, so they had to bet on something else, and I think that turned out to be amazingly successful.
So what is the relationship between them? Are you competitors? How does it?
No, we're siblings. Sometimes
siblings are
squabble.
competitive, yeah.
Sometimes they squabble, but largely we're on the same team. So and that's amazing for us. Like we collaborate closely with them on everything from the research side to core infrastructure and so on. Obviously, we build competing products.
Right.
And I think that's healthy and a natural part of things. And so it's a good relationship.
And they've stepped out with Apple, for example, by doing a relationship, which you all could do, because Microsoft provides software to Apple and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things people don't realize is that all the companies actually have deep partnerships with other companies. I mean, we have a deep relationship with Amazon, believe it or not, on a lot of fronts. So, there's a lot of different connections across the board. It's normal.
Right. So, what is your purview and goal for what you're doing? You have Bing search engine, Copilot, chatbot app. What else?
Yeah, MSN, which is actually the most trafficked news website in the world, believe it or not. And also Edge, the browser, as well as our core AI science division.
So you integrate AI into all the products.
Yeah, that's exactly the goal. Is that we sort of wanted to build a vertically integrated AI studio. What that means is we have the browser for distribution. We have the search engine for content, we have MSN for news, and now we have the consumer Copilot, which is trying to produce this really conversational, fluent AI companion.
Which is a search engine, really, in a lot of
Yeah, I mean, you could think of it as a search engine, but I think it's going to evolve way beyond a search engine. I mean, this is going to become a lasting, meaningful relationship. People are going to have a real friend that gets to know you over time, that learns from you, that is there in your corner as your support.
Yeah, friend is doing a lot of work there. But the word that Satya, as I said, used was agentic, I guess. Agentic, whatever. You're making up words over there at Microsoft. What does that mean, agentic? I mean, these are automated agents. How are they different than chatbot or Pi or whatever?
I think it's an aspirational term, maybe just like friend.
Yeah.
That is trying to say, like.
Because agentic just trips off the tongue.
It's an awkward one.
Look, it's my
isn't it?
agentic.
Yeah.
People would be like.
Who used this phrase? Did someone I know use it?
Yes,
Agentic?
Satya, your
Did
CEO.
He?
Yes.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can't all be perfect.
He also put it on social media. It was everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is the mode we're in at the, I prefer companion.
Companion, okay.
Which is also aspirational. We're not quite there yet. But it's basically getting at this idea that, these AIs are really going to live life alongside you. I mean, they're going to, it's not just a tool.
Right.
This is something that is going to end up forming a lasting, meaningful relationship with everybody over time. It is going to be your teacher. It is going to be your medical advisor. It is going to be your support network. And ultimately, it's going to take actions on your behalf. That's what the agentic piece is getting at.
Copilot is probably a better term. That's the one that you use at Microsoft. It's interesting because right now the manifestation of it, and you're starting to see it. I was just at the Apple event in Cupertino. You're starting to see it in little ways. Most of it is irritating on some level, like Google, for example, with rewriting your emails. When you start to write an email, they're like, can I help you with that? And my email is fully yes, no, okay. And they're like, can I rewrite that for you? I'm like, no, you can't. And it took me more steps. So it doesn't look particularly helpful yet. That said, a lot of people are using it for summarization, for notes, for ideas and things like that. So there's two versions of this, which is something that is a work helper versus what you're talking about, which is a companion and a friend. So without becoming a Microsoft ad, and you can talk about others, I would love you to talk about others, how are the business and consumer sides connected, and where do they diverge? And where does it leave products and others behind? Because it'll ultimately integrate everything, presumably.
I mean, it doesn't have to, right? And it's also unclear
Can I just make an observation? I think search is at the time search was invented, I remember saying to Larry and Sergey, it's Neanderthal. In 25 years, we'll be like, why did we type words into a box? Yeah. And they were insulted by that. But nonetheless, they made a lot of money.
Well, I think that I do think the new modality is going to be increasingly a voice-first modality.
Right. Right.
Because, you know, we've been kind of crawling up to high-quality transcription and voice generation
very slow
for a decade.
Yeah, dragon
and
systems.
It's kind of just been irritating, like you said. It's been irritating, kind of a bit better, nearly there. And I think the last year or so it's sort of tipped over where it's like, wow, you really can have a fluent conversation with this thing. You
right.
can interrupt it. You know, it's super accurate in its transcription. Mm-hmm. And I think that just unlocks a different way of thinking when it comes to, you know, asking a piece of technology to do something,
well,
rather than typing.
The thinking has been there from science fiction, right? If you watch any Avenger movie when he talks to Jarvis or whatever, that's the kind of relationship you're thinking about. What the experience has been for most people in the consumer space, and I'm not talking about bigger things that it will do, like, you know, cancer research, et cetera, it feels like Siri is the dumbest friend you've ever had, kind of thing. And I have said that. It is. It's still terrible.
The problem with technology...
And Alexa's not too smart either. It's like...
No, you're right. You are damn right.
With
yeah,
you men.
I hear you.
Yeah.
The problem with technology and the problem with people like me is that we get overexcited and overstate, you know, where things are about to go, as though they're already here. Like, I remember watching like a Sony Walkman advert and seeing the, you know, guy rollerblade down the boulevard with his CD and the thing, and then I got mine and I was like, tried to kind of walk down the street and it just skipped every 5 seconds.
Yes, it did, yeah.
It was kind of useless. And, you know, if I had it on my desk sitting perfectly flat, it sort of worked. And
right.
like, so this is the challenge. Like, you know, we have a tendency to overstate things, and at the same time, it always feels like this time is different. I mean,
right.
it is profound that
right.
you can now have a fluent natural language conversation about any topic. You pick any topic and it's going to be better. The answer that it gives is going to be more accurate and better, I think,
right.
than your average person in the audience, unless you're on your specialist area of expertise.
Right.
That's quite a profound thing.
It is, indeed. I mean, I think a lot of the two focuses that I do blame the media for this is one on people cheating, students cheating, and every time there's an article, I'm like, students have cheated for hundreds of years. You know that. This is like it's just a new way to cheat, which is the teachers will figure out, and then we'll move on to the next thing, next cheating. And the second thing is that it is not ready for prime time, this idea of that it's still stupid, it still doesn't work. And one of the things I like to, or that it has hallucinations, or it's incorrect, or it thinks James Monroe is still living, or whatever mistake it tends to make. And it reminds me a great deal of what's happening with autonomous vehicles. I mean, when you get in a Waymo in San Francisco now, it is astonishing how quickly it works and how quickly you get used to it and how good it is compared to before. And everyone's like, well, it gets in a car accident. But ultimately, I'm like, humans got into 27 car accidents. We're used to that. So talk a little bit about what, from your perspective, the timeline is for truly integrated, where your AirPods talk to you and you have not like Her, which was, I did not like that movie, because I thought, if you're that smart, why are you talking to this dumb Joaquin Phoenix guy? The director of it, Spike Jonze, who's lovely, he came up to me, he goes, I really want to know what you think, Kara, and I went, eh. And he was like, what? And I go, eh. I was like Larry David, because I was like, this is what happens when intelligence shows up, they flirt, like, I don't get it. But nonetheless, what do you see the timeline for the relationship developing?
I think that next year we will largely eliminate the hallucinations. They will get reduced to a level where you really can use it for practical, everyday use cases. You'll rely on it. It'll give pretty good information.
Right.
And it'll increasingly replace the 10 blue links format.
Right.
I think beyond that, it's going to have memory. Like, that's a kind of missing piece at the moment, which means that you don't really like want to invest in it in a lasting way at the moment, because it's frustrating that it forgets that you told it that you were going out to dinner last night and that you had an undergrad at XYZ. I mean,
So the bad assistant.
yeah, it's kind of, that's boring, right? And so you don't bother really giving it your all. Just think about the moment when like it really does remember everything that you've said, and it's able to retrieve from that history of your conversations accurately.
And the timeline for that?
I think that we're 18 months away from really getting that to a workable level, right?
What company is critical to that? Apple, I'm assuming, for example, because that's where people have that experience, correct?
Well, actually, I think it's mostly about recording new memories that you share with it on the fly rather than accessing existing data. People often think, oh, it's going to sort of plug into every one of your sources.
Your apps,
it
whatever.
can do that. It can do that. But I think what I found is that mostly the valuable data is the fresh information that you impart in a conversation
As part
over
of
the last few days.
investing in a relationship. It's
Yeah, and then you
interesting.
choose what to share and how you frame it and
Does
stuff
that
like
mean, I raised this with Tim Cook, does this mean, I think the apps are going away. You will have a relationship with Uber, but not in the same, because there's friction of opening things up constantly. I'm opening my Uber app, I'm opening my search app. That will go away.
I don't think they go away. I think
Really?
that your AI is just going to learn to use those apps.
That's what I mean, because you're never going to
Right, that's
touch
true.
them again,
Right.
right?
I mean, I personally, look, first of all, the efficiency of tapping on something and very quickly, I think ordering an Uber is like 5 clicks.
Right.
I mean, that's hard to beat. So that it's going to take a few years to really get beyond that. But if you look out far enough, yes, it's quite likely that your AI is going to learn to click on buttons in your browser, enter text in text entry boxes. It's certainly going to be able to read the page and understand the images and all of the text on the page. And that's going to be a very different, format. I think one of the things that's going to come out quite soon, I would say, is this idea of Copilot's vision. It's going to really see what you see. And so you'll be able to have a companion that really browses with you, looking at the images.
See what you see physically, or see what you see as how you use it?
I think at first digitally,
Right.
but then very shortly after that, there will be a visual awareness, whether it's through earbuds or glasses.
Yeah,
or,
earbuds with video in them. That's
yeah, I think that's going to be a new format. Is
Yeah.
these visual earbuds that are kind of.
You saw the Snapchat glasses that came out today.
Yeah, I think they were cool. I mean,
They're rather big.
They're a little bit chunky.
Chunky.
Little
Yeah, that's a nice
chunky.
way of putting it. I do think my pivot partner, Scott Galloway, is correct, is that anything that makes you unable to procreate is not going to work for people. I think when it gets to be something that's easy, like an AirPods with video, I think will be something like that.
And they won't have like exact person recognition. They'll have spatial awareness. So they'll know like you're outside or you're approaching a car or there's 3 other people nearby and so on.
Yeah. I just found my old Google Glass the other day. They're really as awful as they were. I forgot.
Yeah. A little ahead of its time.
A little ahead
nice.
of its time, and unattractive. Same thing. It was quite a thing. It was quite a time back then. They put them on those Victoria's Secret models. That was cool. Do you remember that?
I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, Sergey was like, "We're giving them to Victoria's Secret models. It's going to be cool." I'm like, "You have just rendered this is the line I used, which is you've just rendered supermodels unfuckable." But it was so unattractive. Anyway, let's move on from that. One of the interesting things about your jobs is this relationship with OpenAI, and you and Sam Altman are often pitted as rivals, but you recently praised him. Talk about what is the dynamic, because the Wall Street Journal has reported you're building a, quote, in-house OpenAI competitor inside of Microsoft, and talk about why Microsoft is replicating the resources that it also has with OpenAI. What's the strategy there?
No, look, it's not about replication. I think it's more about having a partner on the Microsoft side that genuinely understands the technology that the company is receiving.
Right.
Because in order to really, use this new clay, it requires a level of technical and scientific craft that, it comes with experience, right? So that we see them very much as a partner, not a competitor, and I have great respect for what they're doing.
So they just released a new reasoning model. It's O1 Preview, or Strawberry. Have you been able to look in the hood? Can you explain the difference in the models? And it seems to have a unique ability to scheme. I think that's the word they use, which is pretend to follow the rules, which sounds problematic. It's even worse than hallucinations. You don't really want a scheming friends. So talk about that.
These tech people, where do they come up? Scheme is a great word. Let's put that out there. Like,
you know, it's the thing it's really good at is that when faced with a kind of complicated reasoning challenge, it can critique its own answers and iterate to find the right answer before giving you an answer.
Okay.
It's why at the moment it's a little slow. It takes sort of 10 to 30 seconds to give an answer. And that's actually pretty useful because it gets feedback and calibrates and iterates before producing a final output. And it turns out that that's actually pretty valuable. I mean, we all do that all the time. Like, we think in our own heads out loud and we try to reason through a problem before giving an impulsive answer. At the moment, these models kind of give an impulsive answer. They just give the first answer that comes out, right?
right. And so scheming is good then.
Well,
cogitating is the word they were looking for.
Scheming seems to have a little bit of a bias as though it's like intentional in its.
Well, that's exactly what the word means.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't strike me as intentional.
You all should have taken English, but not just technology.
Yes,
there's a lot of other words.
It's another weakness.
I suspect you did, because the British people have better education system. When you think about that, of where that's going, the idea is that it becomes. You just said something, that hallucinations will go away, that it will seem.
I think they're gonna go below a threshold and
that you'll notice.
Make it practical, right?
Right.
Right now, you know, they're getting pretty good if you use the very best models, but they still make some basic errors, and I think those more basic errors are going to get reduced to.
And the highly specific ones will be trained on very clear data, correct? That is accurate.
Yeah, especially if you want to sort of focus them on a domain of expertise, like a legal domain or financial accounting, or get to know your company's knowledge really well, or medical, exactly. Yeah.
Right, and it has to be. It can't be scheming or being hallucinating for that.
No.
Let's talk, speaking of competition, let's talk about Elon Musk. Reed Alberghetti at Semaphore recently proclaimed that Elon is winning the AI race. I wrote him a note and just wrote, ha. Because of computing power, he has built a data center in Memphis for XAI, apparently breaking quite a few rules. What a surprise. And polluting the local population.
These are the diesel generator ones?
Diesel generators. Well done, Elon. He says about 100,000 H100 GPUs are operational, another $100,000 in the way. He does make things up, so let's take that with a grain of salt. These are graphic processing units for high-speed processing of large data. He's doing a whose is bigger here thing because he's hopelessly insecure and narcissistic, but would you put that into the scale? Just over a year ago, InflectionAI was building what it was called the largest cluster, and that's another word you guys like to use, cluster, in the world with 22,000 GPUs. Can you talk a little about whose is bigger, I guess, if I have to ask?
Oh, Jesus.
You can take it, Mustafa.
Oh,
I would not ask that of Satya or Sundar, but go ahead. I'm going to ask it of you.
Jesus. I mean, look, Elon's a pretty big guy. What can I say? I mean, it's a big cluster. I think everybody else is training at roughly that same size. So it's impressive that he managed to go from a standing start to now having a competitive cluster with, you know, Microsoft and OpenAI.
Do you believe
he's
telling the truth?
I don't know. I really genuinely don't know. If he has done it in that time frame, that would be super impressive. And I think it's kind of unlikely. But, you know, I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, well, he's going to put out that robo-taxi's going really well.
Right.
He kept saying about robo-taxi, and Waymo has had millions of miles. He's had 0. So.
Yeah. And the humanoid robot. Yeah, I mean, look, we need that kind of vision. I love it.
He told me he was going to Mars 5 years ago, but I wish he would. So that would be great. Good luck. Godspeed. That's what I always say. Sounds like a great idea for most of the human race. Although he's contributed. But talk about that competition. Is that a big competitor?
How's Twitter going?
It's a Nazi porn bar. How otherwise? It is.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah, it's true. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter. It's his yacht. It's his version of a yacht. You know, a ridiculous yacht that allows him to be a toddler. So that said, who are the big competitors from your perspective? If you had to, besides the little one that you don't know, well, no one's going to be in that range because you need money and computing power.
Look, I mean, DeepMind is, I think, the leading lab in the world alongside OpenAI. It's an exceptional team. Like, there's no question around it. And with phenomenal resources now, the TPU chip is pretty incredible.
Amazon and
Google's,
Meta?
I would say, I would say Amazon has done well with their new chip, this thing called Trainium, which is pretty cheap, it seems, and has performed quite well and was used to train Claude, Anthropic's AI recently. So they've actually been very impressive, I think.
And Meta, which I think is the dark horse here, right? A lot of people feel.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a good job of pivoting away from the pivot, right? And kind of getting into the AI first company.
Wait, you mean the metaverse is not where things are going?
Apparently, it doesn't seem to be the thing.
What?
Like, who'd have thought? I don't know.
I did.
You
But go
did.
ahead. Yes, I did. I thought this is fucking ridiculous. I keep thinking they just don't want to die someday. That's what they're trying to replicate themselves digitally. But whatever. But did you? How do you look at their efforts?
I mean, they're the ones open sourcing, right?
That's
so
correct.
It's kind of interesting to see that they've kind of been playing, because they've been playing from behind. I think their view is like, let's, try and galvanize the community. And I think that's going to work out pretty well for them, because then they've got a whole ton of open source developers building on their infrastructure.
Right.
And, we'll see.
Which they're used to. When they used to be, remember, third party, they're used to that kind of relationship. So you've pushed back on the idea that chips are the new oil or gold, which most people, now Jensen Huang is apparently a rock star. I remember when he was dull. But yesterday, and not as rich, but yesterday Microsoft and BlackRock announced they're planning a $30 billion fund to develop data centers and power plants for AI. Obviously, we'll get to energy in a second. Microsoft is predicted it will spend $50 billion this year on capital expense. Wow. I mean, it was high before, but this is astonishing, primarily for data centers. It certainly feels like a gold rush, and a lot of picks and shovels, excuse me.
I mean, it is, right? I mean, the new, intelligence, which is the thing that has made us valuable as a species, made us creative, the ability to accurately predict in a whole range of different environments and produce creative, intelligent things, that is now getting increasingly distilled into an algorithmic construct which happens to be stored and managed in these huge computers. So, it's the substrate that enables everything else. So it's, of course, there's no changing that. That's going to continue.
But at some point, very much, I remember when Cisco was NVIDIA, essentially, in the early internet age. Does that what happens to that? It becomes a commodity and then everybody has it? Or what, from your perspective, what happens?
Well, the strange thing is that the exponentials are both going up and down. What I mean by that is that, the cost of training the very best is higher than it's ever been, and yet you can now get GPT-3 entirely for free that runs on a mobile phone. In fact, you can train it from scratch, on basically a household level system.
Right.
And that's only 3 years ago, right? So that dynamic is almost certainly going to continue. So if you roll that forward to 2030, then you've got real value, real capability that is fundamentally free, or if not zero marginal cost, and available to everybody. And that's what's really fundamentally different to different past waves of technology.
And then the services start, the services that everyone will be paying for, where the business. I know now OpenAI is doing pretty well with subscriptions at this point, but eventually it'll be services that.
Yeah, and I think those service models are likely to be, impact driven. So once you're able to prove some value in a workplace, or when your AI has really, up-leveled you in some way, or given you a skill, or sort of manage some complex task in your personal life, after you've observed the value, then you'll basically pay it a cut.
So one of the parts of it, of course, is not just huge data center. For example, Elon's using Grok AI by, it's not just chips, you need content, and Grok is being trained on content for X, right? Which depends on whether it's going to be good. OpenAI and other LLMs were originally trained by scraping the internet, not a new fresh thing for tech companies to scrape things. A bunch of lawsuits are pending. No one really gave permission for Elon to do that necessarily, although it probably is somewhere deep in one of the terms of service. Now they're paying third parties for their data. Going forward, what do you think AI should be trained on to avoid bias, disinformation, and how close should the inputs be monitored and paid for?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's become clear in the last 3 or 4 years is that as the models get larger, they actually get easier to control.
Right.
So some people feared the inverse would happen, is that they would get bigger and that they would get sort of more dangerous or more prone to hallucination or more full of bias. And as they've got larger, they in fact do a better job of following the behavior policy that you put in the prompt or in the fine-tuning process. And that's actually very good news, because it means that although your underlying data is inherently full of all kinds of biases, I mean, if it's trained on X or it's trained on the open web, it's going to just internalize, you know, information from the entire world.
Yeah, garbage in.
Right.
Garbage
but
out.
not garbage out. I think that's the key thing, is that in fact you can,
you can put garbage in and a beautiful cake comes out, or what?
Well, with a little tuning, yes, you know, it basically gets better at following instructions. And that's good for safety, it's good for product making, it makes them reliable and consistent, they don't do random things as much. And in a way, you know, we want them to hallucinate, right? Like, we want them to be creative. They're not a one-for-one relational database like old school technology.
Sure. So creative in that they think for themselves. I mean, it not in the human thinking, because I think that's difficult for people, but thinking in some fashion, correct?
I mean, they do kind of think, you know, they in a way, the variation in their outputs, the fact that they don't reproduce precisely the same thing every time is a strength. That's kind of what we want from these models. It's just, they have to do so within some bounds of acceptable behavior. And that's what we craft when we're doing sort of prompt design or prompt iteration.
So with these lawsuits, how do these get settled out? Because the last time the media companies tangled with tech, they lost, right? And
yeah. I mean, look, with each new wave, there is going to be a new battle over, you know, what seemed to be acceptable in the past and isn't acceptable going forward. Norms change. And I think that's just a natural part of the evolution, just as there are with self-driving cars or drones in the skies. They raise
so eventually
new issues.
the New York Times will, to me, a lawsuit is a beginning of a negotiation.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately. Is that where you feel
Seems like it.
There'll be some sort of payment method over time?
It seems like it. Seems like it.
Right, which would be a first for tech companies to pay for content. Going back, that was just me saying that out loud. Going back to data centers and energy, I'd love to talk about this for a minute. You've talked about the benefits of AI, including solving some of the world's biggest issues, like the climate crisis, except it's causing the climate crisis. AI is, The Guardian just came out with an analysis indicating there's a significant gap between the official numbers and the actual emissions. For example, Microsoft's in-house data center emissions are at least 21 times higher than the company reported. It looks like there's, you know, these renewable energy certificates, and again, it doesn't help people impacted locally. The XAI data center, there wasn't enough local power, so Elon just fired up 20 gas turbines essentially without getting permits. And you know, this could be a climate disaster. Now, many, like including Sam Altman, are working on alternative energy. I think Larry Ellison, the expert in nuclear fission, just discussed creating nuclear plants, which Larry Ellison and nuclear plants are not two words I would like to see together ever, but here we are. So let's talk about the concerns, you know, whether it's Memphis, whether it's, you know, there's all these are rogue actions he's making, but you have to be responsible in your energy use if you're going to cosplay that you care about the environment, which Microsoft and Apple and many other companies have done.
Yeah,
and should be concerned, by the way.
I do think it's important to point out, like, Microsoft is on a path to being fully renewable.
Right, they
it's
pledged
very close.
carbon neutral, right?
Right, and in fact, it'll be neutral and it will be net negative in some few years to come, right? So I don't think any of those commitments are going to get unpicked here. You know, I sit in some of the meetings, you know, every week, and I see huge investment in fully renewable energy across the board. So I don't think that's going to change.
So you all have to get in the energy business, or in the renewable energy business.
I mean, in some ways, the company is already in the infrastructure business. This is buying vast amounts of land, building huge data centers. And you know,
Google
kind of
has done this with Thermo, with all kinds of things. You know, I recall there were a lot of kooky schemes, but some very smart ones around energy of the server farms, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I actually worked on that at Google in 2017, 2018, and you know, we have the most efficient data centers in the world at Microsoft and Google. We measure this thing called PUE, power usage efficiency, so how much of the energy that goes into the data center gets used to actually run the servers, how much is wasted, and that got down to like 1.1, 1.2.
So you think between crypto and this, which is a huge energy
Well, the crypto guys weren't committed to using renewables.
No, they were not.
So that's pretty different.
Right, but when you're committed, what does that mean? And what are the power needs in the midst of a climate crisis, a very obvious climate crisis?
Yeah, I think all the energy that we consume, almost all, is fully renewable. In a few years' time, the entire supply chain is going to be fully renewable, and I think by 2030 is going to be net negative. So,
including these developments?
Including all the AI, everything that the company does.
Is there one kind of energy you're more focused on? I mean, I know Sam is interested in...
I think fusion is a little way away. I mean, Microsoft does have multiple bets in the fusion space, investments in the fusion space.
And where do you see it right now, as someone who's running this?
I think that for a long time to come, we're going to be using hydro and solar. There'll be some nuclear in the mix, but I think fusion is not going to be a relevant part of the energy mix until post-2030.
Nuclear?
Nuclear to some extent. We already use some nuclear. Right?
You know, someone named Bill Gates told me that renewables aren't going to cut it in an interview. He talked a lot about the idea that he's a big nuclear person. He wants everyone to have a personal nuclear device in their homes, which sounds scary, but maybe isn't. When you have discussions like that, ultimately there's going to be a choice, correct, of where you're going to do this?
Look, I think solar has come down exponentially in the last decade. In fact, I think like 36% of the energy that's consumed in Pakistan is now locally generated solar. That's like on people's rooftops. 2 years ago, that number was down at 4%. So when the costs come down, there's a natural market proliferation of technology because it's in our rational
What does government
interest.
have to do here to push this?
Well, the tariffs with China are not going to help, right? I mean, the fundamental reality is that China produces, the vast majority of the world's solar voltaic cells at an amazing price. And the last thing we should be doing is considering putting tariffs on those because we want them to spread around the world.
Yeah, I've got some news for you. One of the people who's running wants to put tariffs on everything.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, 100%.
It's crazy.
You think it'll hinder economic growth?
I mean, there's no question about it. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so does every economist, apparently. Speaking of which, Karen Howe of The Atlantic recently wrote, Microsoft marketing AI technology to big fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron, help them find and develop new oil and gas reserves and maximize production. Is that work, big tech, big oil together? How do you feel about that?
I mean...
Do you want to talk about the FTC then? Okay. What's next?
Spin the wheel. What do we have next?
Well, FTC is sitting right here.
Look, I think they have made big commitment. The oil companies have made big commitments to transition, and they need to be held accountable, both by us as we're a partner of them, and everybody else is too. We're stakeholders in their future,
right.
and I want to see them move much faster. Of course, like they should be adopting 100% renewable commitments like us.
Yeah, BP, Beyond Petroleum. I always love that. What gall. Anyway, a couple more things. The FTC has launched an antitrust probe. The government there's lots of probes, not just Microsoft. Google just lost its case. It's obviously there's another one coming. But there's around this particular deal. The FTC has launched that. It's under investigation in the UK. And let me see if I got this right. You and Inflection co-founder, it's Karen
Simonian and Reed, yeah.
Chief scientist at Inflection, both left for Microsoft. 60 out of 70 of your Inflection employees left with you. Microsoft paid Inflection $650 million as part of a licensing thing. Microsoft is claiming it wasn't an acquisition. My partner, Scott Gallery, claims it is. The FTC is investigating. Talk a little bit about this. How is this not, is this an acqui-hire model or an acquisition?
No, I mean, as you said, as I said earlier, like we got to a point where it was pretty clear that we couldn't win the consumer battle.
Right.
But the company, so Reid Hoffman, it was our third co-founder, and he's still running Inflection, and they're pursuing, the enterprise mission. They actually are now using other open source pre-trained models, fine-tuning and adapting them for a whole bunch of other businesses and pursuing B2B. I'm not a B2B person, and I didn't want to do that, and that's why we took up the Microsoft offer. I mean, it's also worth adding both the English regulator, the CMA, and the Europeans briefly looked at the case and then dismissed it and aren't taking it anywhere. So
Right. And the
both of those have
FTC?
been given green lights.
And the FTC, because, you know, it's interesting.
FTC is still in process. I mean, they're moving a little slower, but I mean, Europe and the UK have come to that conclusion.
That conclusion. Okay. So the model, it's not, others are doing it. Character AI went to Google. Adept AI struck a deal with Amazon, all without FTC approval. But there is a move of the consolidation of power that, for the first time, I am seeing regulators, including conservatives. There's conservatives who like Lena Khan. That includes J.D. Vance and Matt Gaetz and others. There's unusual bedfellows happening in Washington around that idea. When we spoke in 2023, we talked about an arms race in generative AI. Is that good to have the government looking at this from your perspective? I think it's great.
I think it's great. Like I think I've always said I think we need a set of regulators that deeply understand technology, are very close to the companies, and really understand how we operate in order to hold us all accountable. And we need that healthy conversation and that feedback. I always welcome it. Whenever I travel, I always make time to go see regulators and you know, the politicians.
Do you sense a more intense government on these things across the world? Because they did miss out on the first one. They didn't do any regulation on the first iteration of the internet. Do you sense a different tone from government? You see Pavel Durov arrested in France. These are all different things, but these are all actions that are of a more aggressive government stance towards the impact of tech on society.
I think we've got to just recognize that governments will get it wrong sometimes. Regulators will make mistakes. And that doesn't mean that they should slow down, that we should be forgiving of them just as we should be forgiving of companies and, you know, every other organization if they sincerely made a mistake and need to rein it in. Because what we need is more rapid experimentation among the regulators rather than saying they have to get it right every single time. That just leads to, you know, stasis, and they end up taking far too long to push these cases through. A lot of the, you know, European regulatory cases have taken a decade, whether on tax or on monopoly markets or whatever. And, you know, so I think that is, you know, these are very complicated issues, so it does take time. But at the same time, we need them to move fast, right? This is a moment where the technology is changing super quickly, and, you know, we want people to be involved in the process.
So do you welcome it from states doing that? California has been particularly aggressive. They just signed, Gavin Newsom just signed a bunch of things related.
I think there's a lot of sensible things in the privacy bill that was signed a few years ago, and I think states are, you know, should play the same role, like active, engaged, you know, in the public interest. That's a good thing, isn't it?
From your perspective, then, why doesn't the federal government do anything, right? Nothing.
Why doesn't it do anything?
Yes, in terms of tech regulation.
Well, I mean,
they can't agree on lunch. We understand that, you know, in general. But they have been very missing in action from a federal perspective here in this country.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that about a lot of things that have happened at the federal level lately.
Right.
So, you know, and I think that smaller, more agile regulators, like, for example, the DPO in Ireland, you know, has been very concerned with privacy for a long time. It's built up a very skilled, you know, workforce over a decade, and they're deeply involved and actually have had a big impact. So I think it's about being specialist and highly technically competent in order to be embedded inside of the companies and have close relationships.
All right, I want to end by talking, then we'll get a couple questions from the audience. Before we go, zoom out a bit and get your take on the future of AI. You've advocated in the past for more regulation, more transparency, independent third-party red teams doing ethics reviews, which is a great idea, preventing recursive self-improvement so AIs aren't learning from themselves. Do you think these are essential? And to me, what is the most important thing that has to be done in the short term to make sure we don't drown in this tsunami of change if we don't know where it's going, right? One of the more striking conversations I had at the beginning 10 years ago was a table full, I think Larry or Sergey was there. They were frightened of it. They didn't know, and they usually tell you how much they know, right? And they were not knowing where it was going, and it was vaguely frightening to them, as I recall. And of course, Elon was very famous for talking about how it was going to kill us. He's moved on to a different version of that, which is we're like ants and they're building a highway and they don't care kind of thing. It's sort of a different malevolent look. What do you think needs to be done? What's the most important thing for government and companies to do in the short term?
Well, one of the things that's already happening at the UK AI Safety Institute is that they've embedded UKI Safety Institute people inside of the companies that are really like tracking how big the models are, what capabilities they have, you know, and what the
What's
roadmaps.
in them?
Inside the companies, right? So there's like plenty of detailed interactions between the 4 or 5 big companies and that Safety Institute, which was also backed by the Biden administration last year at the big White House thing. So, you know, I think it's headed in the right direction. This is a kind of unprecedented level of scrutiny and collaboration before there has been any material harm, right? And everybody is learning the lessons of Web 2 and, you know, the lessons of the cigarette lobby and oil and so on and so forth. And I think there's a genuine desire to try to get it right. It doesn't obviously mean that we aren't going to make all kinds of mistakes, but I do think that it feels slightly different this time around. It's much more proactive when these things don't really even work that well yet.
So we're already seeing AI impact this election, and often in a strange way. Taylor Swift posted her endorsement for Vice President Kamala Harris after Trump shared an AI-generated image of her endorsing him. Nice move, Donald. Talk about what you thought about that, because, you know, she called it out specifically. A lot of the things that get called out are the negative impacts of AI as people go to the polls. Right now, it looks like maybe not as much as people had feared, similar to students cheating kind of thing. What is your biggest fear in that as a citizen and as someone who's developing these technologies?
I think that we are going to have photorealistic, super high quality, video-generated impersonations, and that is going to destabilize things for a while. We have in the past had moments in technology where things get, you know, really uncertain and we struggle to, you know, adapt. And then generally speaking, we always find a way of solving that problem. In this case, it will be verifying, we're coming to rely on content that is produced by a human and being able to cryptographically verify that it's been produced by that account or by that person, therefore rendering all of the other content at least open to, you know, cynical speculation about its source and validity. And that will be a very big shift and has a lot of other consequences, but I do expect that we'll end up in that kind of regime in 3 or 4 years, because it will just be zero marginal cost to produce perfect
copies, right? I think it's hard to know what will. People don't realize this, but whoa, just a sec. Let me get that go over. I think people realize this, but when the printing press happened, everyone thought it was the Bible or things of science would be popular. And in fact, the most popular book during that period, which people don't know, is called the Hammer of Witches. And it was basically a QAnon book that was the most, people don't realize that happened. And it drove people crazy and led to thousands of deaths and stuff like that. What is your scariest scenario and what's your best scenario for something with these generative technologies?
My scariest scenario is that it just happens too quickly and just runs away from us. And I think that sometimes, you know, the consequences take a while to settle and for us to really observe. You know, it's taken 80 years or 100 years for us to have a robust vehicle regulation regime. If you think about it, there's driver training and seat belts and airbags and, you know, street lighting and vehicle emissions, and they're all by different agencies, and somehow they all kind of fit together. And I think this time around, it's not going to be like one agency. There's going to be a ton of different pressure testing on the system to figure out where it's weak and where it has these third-degree effects. And as things are moving so quickly, I think it's going to be tough to kind of catch up to that. But I think the upside is, you know, everybody is going to have an incredible personalized tutor in your pocket. Like it is going to be as smart as the very best educator that, you know, any of us have ever had.
Not better than Tim Walz, but anyway, Coach Walz. I know you're more of an optimist in tech than a pessimist. In TED Talk in past April, you said that AI could be described as a new digital species. From your perspective, if this digital species represents the best of us and not the worst, what does that look like? Because, you know, we finally solved these issues of racism and anti-Semitism. Wait a minute, no, we haven't, right? It just keeps coming back. And in the words of Brad Smith, who works for Microsoft, who's a very high-ranking executive, technology is always a weapon or a tool. So what is the best species in this digital species?
I think the reason why I tried to introduce that metaphor was because I'm concerned with the idea of containment and the limitation of the downsides. And so, you know, it's best to frame it in that potential so that we can think of it just as we think of one another. Like, it will have agency, it will have creativity, it'll have memory. And so once you kind of apply that frame, you can then start poking at all the potential weaknesses and the strengths. And I think the aspirational strength is that, you know, these models won't need to be bound by the same limitations that we have as a species. They won't have guilt. They won't have shame. They won't have, unless we program into it, ego. They won't be chippy and anxious. You know, we will have, some people will choose to program some of those traits into them.
Right.
But once we overcome some of their weaknesses, which is memory and factuality and hallucinations and so on, you know, then it really has the potential to be the very best of us, right?
And you don't think shame is part of that? Being the best part of us? Because some people are shameful these days, right?
You know, look,
shameless, really.
can have a place, but it can also, those emotions tend to manifest in pretty destructive ways sometimes. And I think the challenge that we all have is that as personality engineers, which is this new,
wow, that's
you
another
know,
word.
this is a new competency, right? We get to imbue these models with emotional intelligence, with kindness, compassion, sensitivity, and that's the new craft. And you know, we're in like day dot of that experimentation, and I think that, you know, that's an amazing aspiration. If we could like put agents or AI companions or co-pilots with love and kindness into the world, that would be an amazing contribution.
All right, so my last question then is, I just have one more quick one, is that if that's the case, personality engineers, shouldn't they look like the rest of us? That's my issue, is that they don't.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they
Absolutely.
don't. They don't. The personality engineer is an Elon Musk, not a particularly good engineer for personality. Personality disorder engineer, sure, certainly. So I know that's good. You can use it. How do we make sure that happens? Because again, we're back to the same old in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do. I think that this is a space that needs to be owned and co-opted by everybody who is going to be a user, which is all of us. And I think that there's much more that we can do as a company, that I often try to do, to make it a welcoming and inviting place for everybody to be and to create and make. You know, the more, you know, we've had this problem in Silicon Valley for decades, where, you know, technologists end up being nerdy, typically white guys that make technology with our own blind spots imbued in them because we're solving problems for ourselves. We're about to change that because these technologies can now be programmed by anybody, and they're now entering the realm of emotional intelligence, not just utility. Previously, technology software has been about doing something more efficiently, getting a payment in, you know, connecting people in a marketplace. Whereas now, we're actually creating experiences. They're emotional, they're lasting, meaningful relationships. And so that's a moment when we can like reset the counter on who gets to be involved in making them.
All right, well, excuse me if I don't take your word for it. Let me ask do we have time for 2 quick questions? Is that okay? Okay, very quick. All right, 2 very quick questions. Sorry, we went over. Right here, this woman right here with the mask, with the white shirt, her, yeah. And super quick, sorry, I went over just by a minute.
Hi, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask, AI is used for a lot of things. It can also be used for really harmful things, like AI that targets children and wives in Gaza. And Microsoft does have an agreement with the Israeli military to provide Azure services. What is your responsibility in terms of AI and other technology used for war crimes?
That's a good question.
Let
him answer.
I've long been against the use of AI in any kind of weapon system, targeting system, and surveillance system. And regardless of what job I do, I'm still against that. I speak up about it internally, and I'm proud to speak up about it externally. I think that we have to be very disciplined and open and forthright about how these technologies get used. And none of us want to see this make war, you know, easier to do. And that, you know, it kind of breaks my heart that people use our technologies in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. In that regard, I was at a meeting where they were talking about, they were showing off these drones on what looked like game boards. And they're like, isn't this cool? I go, war should be hard, actually, so it's horrible, not easy and fun. And I was like, and I said, you're a shameful person to think that. But, you know, he was a childless cat lady, and I have 4 kids. I love childless cat ladies, by the way. Last question, very quick. Right here, this guy right here. And super quick, sorry.
Thanks. Big fan, Kara. Congratulations on all your success. Quick question. So you mentioned that you envision in the future we will mostly interact with some sort of AI assistant, and all of the services we today use and applications will run in the background, I assume through some API or something. Now, the super apps exist today, right? You have WeChat in China, you have some Kaspi app in Kazakhstan that runs a banking app, you can order food, you can order tickets and whatnot. What happens there is that the biggest companies win those contracts to funnel the business, right,
Okay,
into those
question?
super apps. So what would I envision in this AI app? Same would happen. It would, you know, funnel the biggest taxi company or DoorDash and whatnot. How do we ensure that there is still incentive for startups to play in this field and, you know?
Yeah, I think it's just what I asked. How do you keep the innovation bubbling from the bottom?
I think that, like, every app that was previously represented by, you know, pixels and UI on a phone is soon going to be represented by an agent or a co-pilot, right? So, and programming and creating that is going to be a super easy thing that anybody is going to be able to do in a couple of years. So just as we made this transition from, you know, when everyone got desktops, every business became represented by a website, and your brand values and your product and your offering became a website. Then mobile happened, and everyone shifted to apps. In this next shift, each business and brand is going to create conversational interactive agents, and you're not going to need to have the programming skills or the web development skills, app design skills to do that. You're just going to program it in natural language. So to me, that reduces the barrier to entry, which increases competition, plus the fact it's going to be very cheap. So I think that the market dynamics change as a result. Like it becomes more competitive and more open access. I do think that's a likely outcome.
Well, we will see. Mustafa Suleyman, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.